Let's talk about Apple's recently released M1 chip that is now powering its new MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, and new Mac Mini. Hey, what up? It's your boy MobbJustice back again with another video. As always, thank you to everyone who's been watching and just supporting the channel. You can find all our great content on YouTube and also over on Instagram as well. And for this week, we are looking at what Apple has just announced this past week. The last video, we spoke about this One More Thing event that they had scheduled, and they held it this past Tuesday, and that is their third event in 3 months. In September, we saw them releasing the HomePod and the new iPads. They also then released the iPhone 12 in October, and then now in November we have some new products, mainly around their new chips. Now, firstly, Apple's production game just seems to be going up and up and up. And each time we talk about these keynotes of theirs, I mention how sparked, interested, entertained, and intrigued I am about these events as a creator myself. And when you see the transitions, the filmmaking, it just seems to be, on another level. And once again, the films, I mentioned the films that they make for their products, once again, top notch. Now, as I said in the last video, we did speak about some possible predictions based on rumors that were swirling around a word on the street at the time, talking about the possibility of Apple releasing the rumored AirTags, possibly AirPods Studio, and then some line of Apple silicon based Macs. And I said that the silicon based Macs was what I was most interested by, and that's what Apple actually did. We didn't see anything else, no AirTags, no AirPods Studio, but they did bring out a new line of Macs, and that's powered by the new M1 chip. Now, ever since Apple's WWDC, a Worldwide Developers Conference earlier this year, I did say that I was so excited to see what new MacBooks or Mac line of products would look like with Apple's new silicon, because that's when they announced that they will be moving away from Intel-based chips over to their own in-house bred chips. And this week, Apple officially released that line of chips. It's called the M1, and that's going to be powering a new line of Macs. Impressive right off the bat. I'm just gonna say that some of the numbers that they were quoting are just ridiculous, and it's an interesting design simply because usually when you have some of this architecture, without getting too technical, what they've done with this chip that's interesting is that you have one chip that has your graphics processing unit, that has your CPU, and then that also has your RAM, right, all integrated onto one chip. And that seems like a really cool design, especially if you're going to go into mobile devices such as a laptop. And some of the performance numbers that they were quoting here look like it's going to be quite a powerful chip, and something that they're going to be able to control and tightly integrate into the new software as well. That's macOS Big Sur, which is going to be the conduit through which Macs are going to be able to carry forward this vision of Apple silicon based Macs, and also at the same time being able to have that interoperability between iPad apps, iPhone apps, and then also Mac apps all running on a Mac. Sort of going into this, I think everyone in the community had this idea that Apple in making its own chips would either stretch for performance or efficiency in the form of a battery life, but it seems that they've decided to go and attack both, right, which is quite impressive, and we'll really be waiting to see what happens in real world testing. Now that Apple has a new line of silicon called the M1, it needed, hardware that it can actually show off the power in. And as a result, Apple actually released 3 new devices this past week. They're all refreshes, basically, just changing the internals. That's why I'm calling it a refresh. But when you look at the specs, they really do seem like great upgrades. I think what Apple was trying to go for here was trying to show just how much performance they can eke out of the same design that they've had for 2020. So they refreshed the Apple, the Mac Mini. They refreshed the MacBook Air, which recently got its own refresh just a few months ago. And they also came out with the new 13-inch MacBook Pro. Now, out of all those devices, I'm excited about all 3 of them in different ways. First, with the Mac Mini, the price, the starting point is quite low when you think about what it is, because they actually said that they've reduced the price by $100, which means that the entry point into Mac becomes that much more attainable. I did mention it earlier this year when they did first mention this plan. Could there be some type of a price gain on the side of consumers where they'll be able to get in cheaper because Apple's now making its own chips and cutting out, that Intel factor? Could those gains be passed on to consumers? And in this particular case, it seems that, there have been. Whether or not this will be a trend that continues, we wait to see, but we are hopeful. At least this gives us some concrete hope about that. And then on the side of the MacBook Air, right, the story with the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro is similar because they're talking about, bigger performance gains on the side of performance when you see CPU performance and the GPU performance as well, right? And also talking about some faster memory inside the machines with their SSDs and storage, right? But what was really quite impressive was the battery life that they're talking about at the moment, because in the MacBook Air, for example, I think it's 16 or 17 hours, right, of video playback, and in the MacBook Pro you're looking at 20 hours of video playback, and that is massive. That's almost a 2 times improvement on battery life. Once again, everything is asterisked by real world testing. Let's see how it actually performs in the real world. But if those numbers are anything to go by, that is really great. And then the other thing that really impressed me, that's on the 2 Macs, but specifically on the MacBook Air, is the fact that they've now gone with a fanless design. This is something that, was spoken about, to say that Apple would try to find a way to improve its own thermal design, which means, how the machine actually dissipates heat. And it seems that they've, taken some of their learnings from products like the iPad and the iPad Pro specifically, where you have these very powerful, internals, and then, you don't have a fan inside, but you're still able to cool your machine like that. So on the MacBook Air side, very impressed that it doesn't have a fan. Anyone who's watched my videos, particularly laptop reviews, knows how much fan noise really bothers me, particularly in powerful machines, right? It's just one of those annoyances, especially as a creator. On the side of the MacBook Pro, some of the numbers that they're talking about, once again, very impressive. That one does keep the fan, which then makes one wonder whether the M1 that's in the MacBook Air is the same as the MacBook Pro, right? Does it mean that the MacBook Pro will be able to sustain, that high performance for a longer rate because you've got the fans cooling the system? Is there going to be throttling that's going to be happening on the MacBook Air? We wait and see. So on the whole, it was a very solid set of announcements that Apple gave, first on the M1 chip and then on the new line of Macs that are being powered by this new Apple Silicon. There were some quirky moments, as Apple does. We spoke about the production value of this keynote, which is, higher and higher. But, as we saw with the James Bond moment in the iPhone 12 keynote, there was, a couple of moments during this one. Two stuck out for me. The first one being Craig and, the sexy opening of the MacBook Air. And then there was also a film that was made about how excited developers are. I remember actually tweeting like, guys, are developers really this excited about these chips and these MacBooks? But yeah, Apple's always here with the entertainment. And then on the M1, two things. First, what I've been saying throughout this video, let's see how they perform in real life, because as much as Apple says these things, we need to test them, for ourselves, some of the claims, some of the benchmarks. And speaking of those benchmarks, right, some of the graphs and some of the comparisons that Apple was making, it really does not make any sense. When you see the graphs, some of the graphs that were being used, talking about, the performance of the M1 versus, the latest PC chips, or, faster than, popular laptops. What do you mean? What machine are you using? Like, what is that benchmark? And some of the graphs, because they aren't really done to scale and they aren't really noted properly, it just seems like a lot of marketing jargon that was just used as part of the keynote to demonstrate the speed. I wish Apple would just find better ways of dealing with performance and actually communicating that, especially to an audience of pros that they say that they're trying to cater to with some of these products, right? If you're putting out a MacBook Pro, right, and you expect pros to use it, then at least give the pros some pro benchmarks that they can actually measure against. But apart from that, Apple will be Apple. And then the other one on the same front is just the fact that Apple has brought out the new MacBook Air, the new Mac Mini, and the MacBook Pro on the 13-inch side. And same as I said on the fan issue between the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air, does that point to a slightly different M1 that's been tweaked? And because that then leads into the rest of the Mac lineup, right? What's going to happen with the 16-inch MacBook Pro? What's going to happen with the iMac Pro, and as well as the Mac Pro, right? When Apple puts its chips in those machines, is it still going to be the M1, or are they going to have perhaps an M2 chip? And because on the Mac Pro side, for example, you don't necessarily need to be having that integrated design because you have that room, you can cool this thing, right? How are they going to actually, what's that design going to be like, and how much performance are they going to be able to eke out? Once again, we wait and see. Very excited to see what Apple is doing. Very happy to see them releasing this line of Macs. And I think for me, it's an easy recommendation to now make, right? That, if you had held out or were thinking about an upgrade on that side, these might be some good products to consider. And then the last one, this is now around price once again. As we mentioned earlier on, there has been that $100 price drop on the Mac Mini, those gains coming to consumers. Keen to see whether or not some of those price drops will happen with the rest of the Mac, with the Mac line. It's unlikely, but it's good to hope. It's always good to hope, and especially for some of the pro level machines, where they normally would have had some of the external components from Intel. Now that they're in-house, is that going to result in some type of a price difference? We wait and see. So that's been it for this edition, right? Thank you so much to everyone who's always watching. What did you think about this week's keynote? Are you excited about the new Macs? What did you think about some of the benchmarks? What do you think is going to happen with Apple Silicon going forward? Is it actually going to be the game changer? Because it's the first manufacturer in a long time to actually come up with its own chips, and then to sort of take out the role of AMD and Intel and sort of say we're going to be doing everything in-house. What do you think this will mean? If you're a creative, are you interested and hopeful about what this is going to mean for apps like Final Cut and then the Adobe Suite? Let us know in the comments. Otherwise, I'll catch you guys in the next video.
Hey, this is Baby G and you're watching the MobbJustice channel. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Live it, love it, like it. This is the MobbJustice TV.